So, we always work through that every year in November. I am going to turn it over to Mick Dalrymple, who is our first, one of our first speakers. He's the Director of University Sustainability Practices at Arizona State University. Mick, I would love it if you would just take a couple minutes to introduce yourself.
Sure. So I basically help coordinate the sustainability operations of Arizona State University's community. We have 8 sustainability goals, and they're all very aggressive. And so it takes a huge collaborative effort across the entire university to get that done. So basically our office acts as internal consultants to the rest of the community to help other departments to build collaborations, build partnerships, start initiatives, and come up with solutions, do research and research best practices as well. And just kind of serving as an internal consultant to the rest of the university to achieve our sustainability goals. And then we also do the measurement and reporting on those and celebrate successes. Is that what you were looking for?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And next up, we have Camille Kirk, who's the Director of Sustainability and Campus Sustainability Planner for the University of California, Davis.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to join this panel. By way of a little bit of background about me, I'm trained as a geographer, which I personally believe is maybe the very best discipline training for the systems thinking problems of sustainability. And in my day job, I lead the UC Davis Sustainability Office. And the key roles and responsibilities of the UC Davis Sustainability Office include demonstrating leadership and providing vision and direction for sustainability. And we do that through advocacy. We advocate for sustainability in leadership settings and other settings. We lead the sustainability planning effort to coordinate actions and promote sustainable planning across the university, and we participate in policy development. We foster connections by building external and internal relationships, and we do a lot of work on collaboration, also helping to link research efforts with campus operations. And we work hard on creating a culture of sustainability at UC Davis by conducting sustainability assessment across a broad array of performance metrics and communicating about sustainability to our broad campus community on and off campus, and developing and running engagement programs. And these are all, I think, very key to success with any kind of carbon neutrality goal or effort. UC Davis has the benefit of being in the University of California system, and that system has an unbelievably deep bench of faculty, student, staff, and leadership talent. And these folks have all really helped the UC innovate and push forward on sustainability goals, such as a carbon neutrality goal. We have a sustainability policy, so similar to what Mick was talking about with ASU, we have a policy that covers 11 now areas of sustainability. We're getting ready to include a 12th section of the policy. And in that policy, we've incorporated a climate neutrality and a carbon neutrality initiative to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2025 across our scopes 1 and 2, so our business operations, and no later than 2050 for our scope 3 commuting and business air travel emissions. I'll just add one last thing, which is I'm of the firm belief that nothing hard gets done without collaboration. And I also believe that the biggest challenge to achieving carbon neutrality is a problem of engagement, a challenge of engagement. We know lots of technical solutions, and we even know financing solutions for how to get there. What we need is the engaged and consistent, sustained will and leadership and personal investment of every sector of our campus and our university system to achieve neutrality. So with that, thank you.
Excellent. And that's hopefully what this session is really going to start to discuss, is how different groups on campuses work together, or maybe where some of those challenges really arose in trying to work together, for other institutions to be able to learn from your efforts, because that collaboration piece is really important. So we will then move over to Stephen Porder, who is the Assistant Provost for Sustainability and Professor of Ecology at Brown University.
Hi, everybody, and thanks so much for inviting me to be part of this. I also have already learned things in the first 10 or 12 minutes that we've been together. I am I'm in a slightly different position, I think, than many other of the panelists, in that I sort of sit on both the faculty. I sit on the faculty side of the fence most of the time, and my position as assistant provost is new, and as far as I know, unique to Brown. So I got involved because our carbon reduction goals were coming up. You know, we had said we'd made a pledge in 2008 to achieve something by 2020, and we needed new goals. And as the community came together to talk about what those goals might be, I sort of got more and more engaged. And the president and provost asked me to assume this new role. And so I work really, really closely with Jessica Berry, who I think may be attending this conference, or at least part of it, who's the director of sustainability within facilities management. But my job is more about helping to guide our leadership in visioning where sustainability should go. So step one of that was trying to articulate new carbon reduction goals, which are 75% reduction by 2025 and 0 by 2040, again, as scope 1 and 2. And then also to write a sustainability plan for the university, which is sort of in the works and which we did not have previously. A lot of other things that I do are focused around engagement and go back to some of the early comments about needing universities to go out beyond themselves in order to really have an impact. So I'm ramping up that kind of work as well. But my first task was carbon reduction, and I think that's why I'm here, although I'm happy to talk about all the other things as well. Oh, and I'm an ecosystem ecologist, and I think that ecosystems are better than geography for figuring this stuff out, but we can talk about that later.
And we will now schedule a 3-hour session that will take place in about a month to have that debate, because that sounds great.
All right, I'll start sharpening my knives.
So we've heard from our panelists and gotten them to introduce themselves. We would also like to know sort of who's in the audience. So I think Kate Peterson is going to hopefully be able to send out a poll where you will be able to select your sort of the role on that poll that most closely aligns with what you would think, but there should be an other category as well for those of you who don't necessarily fit. All right, I'm gonna give folks just a couple more seconds to start filling this out. We've got almost everybody. We have a really good mix of folks here. This is really exciting. We have several people who are administrators at colleges and universities, students, staff, faculty. We have sustainability professionals, which is great, researcher, utility provider, nonprofit professional, and 3 of my favorite others who are just like, none of this quite works for what I do, so I'll just put myself over here. Thank you all so much for coming. It's always really helpful to know who's in our audience. Again, please ask questions that may be specific to your own roles or just that you think that the audience would benefit from in general. We're going to go ahead and start moving on to the discussion questions. The first one is that we just kind of wanted to get a baseline again about sort of what kind of groups and what kind of people were involved in these conversations at your universities. So Camille, if I can start with you, and we'll do which individuals, groups, and departments at your university have led the effort in achieving carbon neutrality?
Well, so first of all, I want to straight up say we haven't achieved carbon neutrality. We're a long ways off. And it also really depends on how you define carbon neutrality. So many of you probably know that the Climate Registry has actually chartered an interesting process that is looking to create a carbon neutrality database. And among those efforts include understanding the various definitions of carbon neutrality. So I first want to just declare we have not achieved it at the UC. We are working on this diligently, but we're not there. However, I think actually just getting to the place where you've articulated the goal of carbon neutrality is a big step forward. So let me tell you a little bit about what we did to get there. So in the UC, students have been very, very active in leading. Back in the early 2000s, they called for the creation of a sustainability policy for our operations because they pointed out that we were doing a lot of great work in teaching about climate change. We were doing a lot of great work in researching for solutions and understanding the science, but we were not necessarily making any public demonstrated commitments and investments that would get us to these different points that we needed to get to for sustainability. And not just carbon neutrality and greenhouse gas reduction, but other aspects of sustainability too. So They called for us to develop a policy, which we did, and that policy is very much a living policy, and it's growing every year. As I mentioned, we're looking to add a 12th section this coming up January. This has involved not just students, it's involved faculty, staff, senior leadership, it's involved external partners. I think one of the most important things is that you've got all these different levels intersecting, so top down, leading from the middle, bottom up, and it's kind of like a dance in a way. So it's like those Jane Austen movie, those period movie dances where people are coming in and they're swirling and they're moving out. And a lot of it has to do with what's the right time for the particular type of action that you need to achieve. Do you need to goad action? Do you need to guide action? Do you need to provide leadership? And so I would say all of the groups have been really instrumental. Students and faculty have been particularly instrumental in framing the moral and the scientific imperatives behind articulating a carbon neutrality goal, and top leadership's been absolutely critical in articulating what that goal would be and declaring it for the entire system. And staff have really been at root of thinking creatively, how are we going to implement this given the 9 million other goals and challenges that any modern public university is facing, or private university for that matter.
No, thank you. And we're going to talk a little bit about the decision-making processes that have evolved and developed at each of your institutions, because they'll look a little bit different, but you're absolutely right. Getting this many groups sort of on the same page with anything really is always an enormous challenge. So the fact that, you are all constantly working through this is definitely something that our audience can learn from. So thank you. Stephen, can I have you address the same question of sort of what individuals, groups, and departments at your university have sort of led the efforts?
Sure. I mean, it's sort of a similar story at Brown with, I think, a couple of key differences. One of the key differences is that we're a much smaller shop and we're a private university. And so the number of people who need to say, we're going to do this before it actually happens is substantially smaller and therefore potentially easier to manage. So in our case, the ultimate signers of a carbon neutrality pledge were the corporation, which is our sort of board of trustees, and the president had to convince them that that was the case. But in terms of who was critical to the effort, faculty and students are always pushing, and I definitely agree with the point that timing is everything, and finding when you need to nudge and when you need to offer support and when you need to back off are very key parts of the dance. In our case, I think one of the things that was critical was coming with a positive vision that it could be done. So we did some legwork to say, look, President and Provost, like there is a path to doing something that we've all know that we have to do, but have been sort of intimidated by because it seems like an impossible thing. There is a technological solution. There is also sort of a financial solution. And we had those pieces in place, not perfectly, but we gathered those pieces with the president's support over the course of about a year. And then as those pieces fell into place, we got buy-in from offices that wouldn't necessarily be involved in sustainability. So for example, the Office of General Counsel had to look over all the contracts for power purchase agreements, which were wildly different than any contracts the university had ever engaged in. The CFO had to be comfortable with the financial implications of the decision to totally retrofit the central heating plant to switch over to renewable electricity driven heat pumps. So in addition to staff who are in facilities and know how the campus works, we need to educate the president about how the heating system in the campus works. Is not on her agenda, and then understand how changes there could play into this really large goal. So I guess what I would say is all of the usual suspects, advocates, people who study climate change, people who think that climate change is a great moral issue, which I agree with, but also finance people, investment people, contracts people, all the way down to project managers who are going to be doing individual projects in a particular renovation that have to meet criteria that will improve the efficiency of the whole campus so that we can make campus-wide changes to our heating distribution. So it really is about getting everybody, even the people you don't think need to be there, they need to be there. And the last thing I want to say, as a faculty person, I feel very comfortable saying this, faculty have almost no idea how a campus actually functions. They show up and they teach their classes, and if the projector doesn't work, they call somebody, and then they go back to their offices and they do their research. When I started my job, I didn't know what an RFP was, right? And yet I was calling for the university to achieve carbon neutrality, and they said, well, okay, well, you know, so it takes everybody learning everybody else's language and committing the time to understand that we're all part of the same ecosystem, but playing very different roles before you can make progress.
Thank you. Yeah, and I completely agree that it's always just, it seems like there's a little bit of tension between it among all of these groups. And I'm thinking that, you know, what one of our next questions, we'll start to address that. And I apologize that I'm messing with my background, where I'm dealing with some morning sun shifting, and now apparently my hair has disappeared. But Mick, we will go ahead and turn this over to you, and I will try to fix that. Can you answer the same question? So what individuals, groups, and departments at your university have led the efforts here on achieving or on your road to carbon neutrality? I think that's a really good distinction.
Sure. And, you know, I feel a little bit of deja vu with Camille and Steve, and a lot of the same suspects and challenges along the way. We actually achieved carbon neutrality or climate neutrality for scopes 1 and 2 in fiscal year 19, excuse me, which is about 6 years. Our goal was 2025 and 2035 for scope 3. So we achieved it about 6 years early, and we'll continue to maintain that going forward and continue to improve upon it. But you know, it really started in the early 2000s with a lot of energy efficiency retrofits of various buildings. We've spent invested $100 million in retrofitting buildings for energy efficiency, very large set of campuses. And then when President Crow arrived, in 2006, he was one of the founders of the American University Climate President's Climate Commitment, College and University President's Climate Commitment. And so really in 2006, 2007 is when it really kicked off to, we're gonna, you know, go for neutrality here. And so, you know, along the way, tremendous number of people involved in energy efficiency retrofits through contracting agreements, ESPCs, as well as direct contracting. We have a sustainability initiatives revolving fund, and so the finance department is very involved in that. It's basically just a large revolving fund that invests in energy efficiency projects that pay back into that fund through the utility savings. And then with our renewable energy contracts, we've got 90 on-site arrays, and then another large off-site array, and then a virtual power purchase agreement with a wind farm in Oklahoma. And so there were a lot of people involved from finance and legal in that, as well as the utility department, our energy innovations, and our facilities side, and the sustainability officer, and of course the CFO. So when we actually get to the neutrality itself, the decisions ultimately were made by a sustainability leadership team that's comprised of basically it advises the CFO. So the CFO makes the decisions, and it involves myself as the director of sustainability practices, my manager, who is the vice president for business services, and the chief sustainability operations officer, then our vice president for facilities development and management, and our assistant vice president for facilities management. And then we also in our facilities department have an energy innovations department that is solely focused on you know, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and just utility savings in general. New technologies, things like that. So they were all involved. And then we also have somebody from grounds, our director of ground services and zero waste, that's part of that committee, although not as much involved in the climate side, but just in overall sustainability decision making. And so all of these groups have been involved. Like Stephen said, it's a collaboration that has to happen across many, many different departments. And the only way to really get it done is to get the ethos and the goal integrated into the fabric of the university, and the fabric of the management of the university. If people are not all on board, then something's gonna drop, and it's just not gonna get done. So it helps a lot to have our president pinging us. Probably, it used to be every 3 months, now it's about every month, saying, just a really quick note, when are we taking the campus off the grid? And he's explained as well that that's not literally what he means. It's just shorthand for, when are we going to get to 100% renewable energy, or when are we going to reach neutrality? Basically, these big milestones along the way. And so, that motivation from the top, as well as committed people in key positions that enable this to happen, is what has actually led to the achievements that we've had so far. And we've got a long way to go still, in order to possibly get to 100% renewable energy. That's not an official goal, but that might be the logical next step. Maybe not. Maybe there's a better goal. And then also, we just know that carbon removal is going to be key to achieving the climate goals of the planet. And so what can we play? What kind of a role can we play there? So there's the internal operations, and then of course there is all the research and the external outreach in order to help others achieve these goals as well. But does it make sense for us to start getting into carbon removal, because we know that that's going to be needed if we're going to stay under 1.5 degrees or even 2 degrees.
And I think each of you have touched a little bit on sort of our next question. And now I feel like I'm disappearing into the sun, which feels a little metaphoric for our discussion this morning. So I'm actually okay with this. We wanted to sort of talk about what groups were important at different stages. And you've all touched on this a little, of sort of how the efforts got started on your campuses, but also how they pushed forward. And I'm curious if maybe we can just target it a little. At what point did your administration start getting really involved in the conversation, in the decision-making processes? Maybe even at what point did you start to create things like sustainability departments or positions that were dedicated to those? And I know this is a little different than the discussion question I sent you, but just, sort of based on your responses, I think this might be okay. So Stephen, could we maybe start with you if you have a response to this?
Sure. I mean, Brown has one of the older environmental studies departments in terms of undergraduate education in the country. And so there's been a long history of environmental advocacy at the university. In terms of carbon reduction plans specifically, President Ruth Simmons in 2007, 2008 put out our first official carbon reduction goals. And I would say that they were modest. They were, 40%, 42% relative to 2007 levels by 2020. And I would also say that there wasn't an enormous amount of planning going into how that was going to be achieved. It was a goal. People thought it was reasonable, it was doable. I was just getting to Brown at that time, so I don't have a lot of insight into the process at that time. But if you fast forward, actually, it was President Trump's announcement on pulling out of Paris that stimulated, as Tim mentioned, quite a lot of pushback from university communities. And at that time, I had a conversation with the president about her statement that we were sort of committed to our climate goals, regardless of what the US was doing, and was able to sort of break. So she had yet to hear sort of the terms scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and like what progress we could make on these. And so this was in early 2017. And so we had a meeting, several of us had a meeting with her and said, look, we have this problem. It's our electricity is one thing. It's our combustion on campus of natural gas. That's the next thing. And then there's this other bin called scope 3 that's really complicated. And we'll leave that for another conversation because it's a pain, right? And she said, okay, well, let's start really looking into electricity and natural gas and what we're doing on our campus. And so she created sort of out of whole cloth, committees that drew from expertise that already existed on campus. So facilities management have been working under a mandate of energy efficiency for quite some time, but not under a mandate of carbon neutrality, as I'm sure Mick will speak to, or Camille will speak to. Like that, those are two very different things, right? Getting light bulbs that pay back is very different than imagining how you're going to redesign your whole campus to be carbon neutral. So as those conversations got going, that was really the catalyst for us to envision bolder goals. And then it became a matter of plausible paths, things that we could really achieve. We couldn't say we were going to do it in a year. We knew that we needed big infrastructure renovations. We couldn't do it in a year. So we needed plausible paths financially, technologically, in terms of time frame. And we needed to empower the people on campus who already knew how to do this stuff, that there was sort of a directive to do it. And so that's really when the modern carbon goals, or the newest carbon goals that we have got rolling, is when she sort of said, okay, let's really put our heads together. Let's draw on the expertise we have on campus and attack scope 1 and scope 2 first. She did ask us to look into scope 3, but we're still looking into it, as are many of our peers, because it's a challenging one. But I guess I'll stop there and let my colleagues speak. Yeah.
No, that was very helpful. Thank you. Mick, can you respond to this one too?
Sure. Just similar to Stephen, I came to ASU in 2010, and this kind of really got started in 2006, 2007. So 2006 was the development of the Second Nature the President's Climate Commitment. And then 2007 was our first greenhouse gas inventory. And then somewhere 2007, 2008 is when we made the commitment to reach neutrality. And then our first strategic plan was in 2010, 2011. I think with the development of that plan, I mean, it really, a lot of this started at the very top. President Crow said, we need to do this, higher education needs to do this. So just figure it out. So it became a comprehensive plan of energy efficiency coupled with renewable energy, coupled with highly energy efficient new construction. And maybe what we really need to tackle now is our infrastructure. We've got, like a lot of higher education institutions, we have some natural gas turbines, and that's a huge investment, and it's getting away from it is a huge transition and very technically complex. And so that's the area that we basically still need work on. We need a solution for. Renewable energy really is pretty much a slam dunk now. Anybody can get renewable energy through power purchase agreements or virtual power purchase agreements. So that shouldn't really be a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge if you haven't done it, because the contracts are extremely complex and the deals are extremely complex. And I would actually recommend getting a consultant if you have not been through it before, because the complexity is, it's like going to Wall Street. You don't want to go to Wall Street and make a big deal if you have never been there and experienced it before. And so you need that expertise from somebody who really knows the market, really to look at risks and manage risks, and get a good deal too. So I would recommend that, but I'm not sure if I've completely answered the question, but does that help?
It does. I mean, I think, one of the things that we're trying to get at is just sort of how some of that jockeying for position takes place. And ASU really sounds a little bit unique in terms of that this was sort of a very top-down effort, perhaps, linked to a lot of other things that were going on campus. We've actually had a couple of specific questions for ASU that I'm going to circle back around to. But Camille, I want to give you a chance to respond to this as well. At what point did your administration really start taking an interest in this and start getting involved in these conversations in sort of a newer, different way?
Well, we have, so I think I need to tell two parallel stories, one of which is about UC, the whole system, and then UC Davis. So across the system, as I mentioned, we had students leading the charge with the Board of Regents, which is our governing board, to develop the Sustainable Practices Policy in 2003. It subsequently grew. After that, it started with clean energy and green buildings. It grew to include climate protection and a whole host of other things. 2008, we signed every single chancellor and the president. So each campus has a chancellor, the system has a president, all signed the then American College and University President's Climate Commitment, now the Second Nature suite of commitments. In 2013, our then incoming new president, Janet Napolitano, declared at her first Board of Regents meeting in November of 2013 that we would become the first major research university system to attain carbon neutrality by 2025. And she, being a really savvy politician from Washington, D.C., recognized immediately that she had to do a lot of coalition building, and that included creating a leadership body, an oversight body that is named the Global Climate Leadership Council, and that's been really instrumental in ensuring that there is still focused attention despite the many, many challenges that are confronting us every day as a research university system. Not the least of which is pandemic response, which has led to some honestly hair-raising budget challenges for our system and probably every single university system in the country at this point to grapple with. And then also we joined we were instrumental actually as a system in helping form the UC3, which is the University Coalition for Climate Change, and has been really an important collaborative body as well. The UC system formed a wholesale power unit to develop a lot of offsite renewable energy sources, including biogas. And then through the aegis of the Global Climate Leadership Council, the GCLC, we've also funded a huge number of different research projects and initiatives, one of which is the UC Carbon Offsets Project, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. At UC Davis, in 2005, we formed an advisory committee and used that to charter our first campus sustainability plan. That led to the creation of the Sustainability Office in 2008. And we released our first climate action plan in 2010, which articulated at that time some pretty big ideas. The ideas, it would be a little bit overstating it to say that the plan is the only reason why we have the big ideas. There's a lot of folks who are working together collaboratively on campus to advance some pretty key initiatives at the campus, which included studies for reducing our energy used in lighting. So we articulated a smart lighting initiative. It started out with a really ambitious goal of reducing 60% of our electricity used in lighting. That proved to be a little bit more ambitious than we could tackle. I believe we've gotten to 40% reduction, massive innovation led through the California Lighting Technology Center, which has been a really important partner with industry, and we use the campus as kind of a test bed for what we can do. We also did a study to ask the question, how would we reduce by 40% our expenditure of energy for heating and cooling. We have district heating and district cooling. They're both water-based systems. We have steam heating and we have chilled water for cooling. And that led us to do some really interesting studies that have culminated in the first neighborhood on campus under construction right now. Ideally, because we have to dig the campus up to replace steam pipe with low temperature heating hot water pipe. Ultimate plan for electrification through use of heat recovery chillers, because of course we have this district chilled water system, and through the beauty of physics, we can still recover heat out of cold water. There's still latent heat. We're not at absolute zero, so we've got heat to pull out. And we're studying over in our medical center campus, which has a major hospital as well as clinical facilities in Sacramento. We're studying how to move that off of a cogeneration that uses natural gas while preserving reliability. So the one thing we do not want in a healthcare setting is to lose reliable power. So we're doing some really interesting studies right now. And again, I would say that, like Stephen pointed out, a lot of it has to do with educating administration. So here's what you own and operate. Here's how it works. Here's what the challenges are. Here's the financial challenges, the technical challenges, the investment trade-offs. here are the challenges we have if we use biogas. What does that mean? If we use offsets, what does that mean? Can you use offsets responsibly? What are responsible offsets? What are offsets that actually are additional, that truly reduce greenhouse gas emissions? So we've got this whole carbon offsets project in the UC that's looking at that right now. We've been presenting on that through webinars and conference presentations. A lot of it has to do with leveraging our own research and assets for creating carbon offsets that are truly additional and truly efficacious, and then also doing some research on what offset project types and projects in the voluntary market are truly additional. So again, we're kind of coming at it with a values and principles basis for what are we going to do to take action. And I would say that one of the key decision-making tools that we use, and it has been a major shift because in a university setting, especially in a public university setting, first cost is usually the driver for all conversations, but we have been able to move incrementally into the use of life cycle cost analysis. And that has been absolutely key to the decisions for things like moving from steam to low temperature heating hot water. Without the life cycle cost analysis that showed over a steam system lifespan, you will achieve a major savings operationally if you move to low temperature heating hot water. Otherwise, we could have easily just re-upped on steam because first time capital costs are lower than the conversion. So I would say life cycle cost analysis is a major part of this decision-making process.
That's really helpful. And I really like what you're talking about with educating your administration. And we had a question from an audience member that dovetails a little bit with this. And it's really talking about priorities on campus. She asked, how can the Vice Chancellor for Administrative Services persuade his boss that he should have a higher level leadership on this? Our campus focus is on social and racial justice, on diversity and student success, healthcare missions, etc. The leadership doesn't make the connection to climate action as being key to this. And I see this connecting sort of to your piece about education. So if any of you had to approach this issue and sort of connect maybe those climate issues or connect some of those long-term solutions to other things that were already priorities on campus, maybe specifically to what this person addressed, but maybe there was something else going on too. And Camille, can I just, since you brought up the topic of education or admin, thank you.
I will say that's happening right now actively in the UC system. Students, staff, and faculty have created a UC Green New Deal Coalition, and they are making for everyone clear the connection, the deep connection between environmental justice, social justice, and racial justice through the lens of climate action and a just transition. So I think it's becoming really hard for anyone to ignore this aspect. We do also, though, happen to have in the UC a number of chancellors and a brand new president, President Drake, who are who already understand this connection and who are actively working on their campuses on racial justice, social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I believe that it is up to sustainability officers working with their fellow DEI officers and their fellow global affairs officers through the lens of the UN Sustainable Development Goals to articulate this clear connection between environmental justice and action and social justice and action. And I think that there's a great argument to be made, and it's the moral imperative at this moment. So I think again, it's an education question, and there's some new framing that we can do with things like the SDGs.
I really like the idea of sort of crafting those partnerships across campus, especially with the DEI efforts that are going on. That's a really smart way to do this. Mick, have you approached any of this at ASU? I mean, I know you're in a little bit, again, of a different situation where the president kind of said, yeah, let's do this. But did you have to sort of educate your administrators about anything related maybe to connections to other priorities on campus?
I think that the largest education effort has been around pricing on carbon, creating a proxy price on carbon or a real price on carbon, and what that would do and how that would work. And actually not having all the answers, but trying to figure out how some things work. So we had a proxy price in for one specific program, but then when we reached neutrality, suddenly it became a real price. So we had to we had to figure out, we had to adjust. Okay, well, that actually means something different. So now how does that change how we implement that? So that was one of the issues. On the DEI side, I completely agree with everything Camille said, that, you know, it's a responsibility to educate as to the overlap between racial justice and climate change or environmental justice. That you know, clearly the largest impact of climate change is going to be on people who have fewer resources to do something about it. And we have research, we have 40 years of research at issue related to urban heat island that basically shows the same thing, that the people that are most effective are most affected are the ones that have the least resources to mitigate those impacts. So that is a big responsibility. And then I think just, you know, also another big education thing that we've had to do is on carbon offsets and carbon removal, and, you know, and what is additionality and how does that apply to offsets, and how can we tie offsets to the research, education, and community embeddedness missions of the university, because all of those things are key. And actually, I should probably point that out, that one way to really strengthen resolve around climate issues is to make those connections to the research, education, and community embeddedness missions of the university. Because if something is seen as a purely operational goal, then it becomes secondary to the mission goals. But if you can create those ties, it creates more lasting power, it creates more durability and more commitment, and a broader stakeholder group supporting that goal. So that is a key strategy in trying to make things that are lasting and go beyond. You know, every organization has turnover in people. And so you want to create as many connections, as broad a web as you can for your activities, in order to overcome those, you know, things that happen with turnover and changing priorities and things like that. And so so that's something too that we've tried to do, is make those ties where some people aren't used to having those ties.
Yeah, and we're going to have a panel session later in this event that's really about those relationships between town and gown. So what you're talking about with that community embeddedness and sort of linking your climate and your carbon neutrality efforts to sort of your larger efforts to be a positive influence on the communities in which you reside, I think is a really, really big piece of this. So we're going to have some really great discussions. I want to be really cognizant of time so that people have their 15-minute break. Before I turn it over to Stephen to answer this question and then maybe do some final closing thoughts, I just wanted to point out that Mick helpfully answered a question in the chat, but I'm not sure everybody had access to what the text of the question was. And so the question was really about universities having this very large electrical load, and whether or not it's really possible and practical for universities to team together and purchase the output of large utility scale wind and solar. So you can see Mick's response to that, and it was really just about sort of how another example of one of those utility scale projects. I think, Kate, maybe if you can actually copy and paste the original question into the chat, then people might be able to link those back to one another. Stephen, if you have any thoughts about sort of this connection between community embeddedness and climate action, between DEI work and social and racial justice, that would be great. And then I'm just going to give maybe each of you about 30 seconds to give any final thoughts, and then we will close down this session and move into break.
Yeah, I think that, you know, like many universities, Brown has a big and increasing focus on equity and inclusion, and a lot of activism and feeling and scholarship going towards those issues. And I think that it's been absolutely critical to, I wouldn't say educate the administration. I feel like the administration was pretty well educated in our case on this particular topic, but to elevate climate in that discussion to the point where sustainability and equity and inclusion are sort of part and parcel of the new mission of our university. So they really have both been elevated sort of semi-equally in the priority list as we move forward, and that's been really wonderful. That's coming from the provost and the president. really wonderful to see that they understand that they're intertwined, and also that both are going to require big financial commitments, right? You know, both on the facility side, on financial aid side, on debt forgiveness side. Like, there's all sorts of ways that we want to make our campus more inclusive and diverse. In order to do that, we're going to have to put real money on the table and make real substantive changes. And I think one of the things that I want to draw the parallel on, maybe to round that out, is to say, I want to come back to what Tim said at the beginning. Carbon neutrality is really just a step in the path, right? And we need a way as universities to do the hard work, not just to, sign power purchase agreements and achieve neutrality, but move beyond that and eliminate combustion from our campuses and help our communities eliminate combustion overall. Because, Camille's point about offsets is well taken, but there aren't enough offsets to solve this problem, right? And so we need to make real infrastructure changes. So in the same way that we need to make real structural changes to our campus to promote both diversity, but also harder inclusion, right? We also need to make real infrastructure changes that are going to cost money, and that money has to come from somewhere. And the only way money comes from somewhere in a university is if it is a priority. So I totally agree with what my colleagues have both said about sort of elevating this to the level of saying, you know what, it might be just as important for a donor to put their name on a new heat pump driven plant as it is on a new dorm, or a new athletic complex. And, I think that mindset has to be there if we're going to lead anything into a better future.
I love that. I'm going to give everybody just a chance to make, and I said 30 seconds, but maybe if we can keep it down to say 20, if you want one takeaway for the people who have attended this session, what would it be? Sorry, Stephen, can we kick it back to you?
So I think that a message of positivity is important. This is doable. And I want to come back to, I think, what Camille said at the beginning. It's really about helping the community understand that we can do it together, as opposed to feeling like it's a goal that we should achieve but can't. And if you can change that framework into a conversation about how we're going to get together to a goal that we can see and reach, then I think there's a much higher chance of success than if you say, you're bad because we're not reaching this goal that we know we should reach. So that's my 2 cents.
I love that, reframing the approach. Mick, can we ask you for your final thoughts as well?
Sure. Stephen articulated my dream of having a donor put their name on an electric heat pump. So yeah, so I think kind of where we're at now is that electrification, electrification is going to be key, and that is huge infrastructure investments in reconfiguration. And so we need to come up with a way to do it, because the climate change impacts are going to become more and more real. I've already had several meetings where somebody couldn't attend because they were fleeing their home because of a wildfire, or their electricity was going out in Florida because a hurricane was coming on shore. These things are very, very real. So those things that, even though they seem like they're really high costs, they're huge opportunities for innovation as well. And those costs are going to seem like small investments relative to the alternative. So I think that we need to work towards electrification as fast as we can.
Thank you very much. And Camille, to close out this session.
Thank you. Yeah, I really echo what Stephen and Mick both said. And I guess I would remind everyone that decisions are often messy in the making. We tend to tell clean and linear stories about decisions made afterwards, but like it's some sort of electricity circuit wired in series, and actually it's parallel with some shorting out because wires cross, and it's quite messy. But really, I think it all comes back to a question of engagement, and which could maybe be boiled down to really a question of how do you get people to align their personal interests with this bigger goal, whatever the bigger goal may be. And in this case, it's carbon neutrality, which we're talking about. So really helping people see and experience and then feel invested in that tangible connection to a shared outcome. And I really like Stephen's point. You have to approach it from a spirit of optimism. This can be done. We know we can do this. We just need to apply the will.
Yes. I so appreciate all of the comments from our panelists. We will reconvene at 1:15 so I apologize for eating into our break a little bit. The next session will be on student engagement, leadership, and recruitment, which is something that all of our panelists this morning touched on, how important that has been in their campus movements, as well as, you know, how important it was to get their administration on board. And thank you so much, all three of you, for your leadership here. We're going to transfer over into this break, and we hope to see you all again shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.